Let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're tackling a massive headache for HR and business leaders: how to navigate the absolute minefield of workplace change without, accidentally triggering a massive wave of psychosocial hazards. We're going to unpack something called the 4C Coherence Model to help you totally upgrade that workplace connection. So, workplace change, it's totally inevitable, right? But the stress and the conflict that usually tag along, absolutely not mandatory. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. Why is the duty to consult suddenly front and center? I mean, organizations have had legal duties to properly consult workers about health and safety changes for decades. It's not a new thing. So, why are these long-standing laws suddenly causing such a giant stir right now? Why all the sudden panic? Well, the answer really boils down to how our workplace laws are overlapping these days. A botched change management rollout? It's not just a minor HR hiccup or a little procedural grievance anymore. With the relatively new positive duty to actually eliminate or reduce psychosocial hazards, a poorly executed change process literally activates severe workplace risks. We're talking about real hazards here: poor organizational justice, lack of support, low job control, zero role clarity. These are not just HR buzzwords, okay? They are serious, legally recognized psychological risks that get triggered the second you mismanage a change.
And honestly, the consequences are incredibly real. Because these hazards are legally recognized now, they're directly fueling a massive spike in Fair Work Commission disputes and WHS regulator interventions, all on psychological safety grounds. The FWEC is laser-focused on the genuineness of your consultation. If they spot procedural flaws, no way. Your enterprise agreements simply will not get approved. Organizations have been put under the microscope on what good consultation actually looks like, and spoiler alert, a lot of them are coming up totally empty-handed.
Okay, so this brings us to the absolute critical missing link in modern change management: coherence. Think of coherence as the glue. By definition, it's the state of being logically connected, consistent, and easily understood. It's when all the pieces of the puzzle actually fit together to form a unified, sensible whole. But here's the catch. When an organization approaches change purely through a defensive risk management lens, just trying to tick a compliance box to avoid trouble, they actually destroy this exact concept. The corporate speak gets stiff, the goals become super defensive, and coherence just goes completely out the window. And what's really fascinating here is that this specific feeling, the idea that it wasn't logical or it just didn't make sense, that is actually the root cause of almost all employee complaints when it comes to change. When your team pushes back, they're usually pointing right at a glaring lack of coherence. The messaging was all over the place, it wasn't uniform, nobody could understand it. So the million-dollar question is, how on earth do we build that coherence back into our consultation processes so our changes actually stick? Right, so that is exactly where the 4C model comes into play. We're going to use this model as our roadmap today. It's going to help us climb out of that basic, flawed compliance mindset and move all the way up to real, trust-based collaboration. The 4C model essentially gives us a hierarchy of coherence. It's an incredible tool to appraise exactly where your organization stands right now and what steps you actually need to take to drastically improve how you connect with and engage your workers. Let's start right at the bottom of the ladder and look at the first two levels. Down at C1, we have communication. This is bare minimum stuff. Management just dictates that something is happening. It's a one-way street, a directive. It doesn't even meet basic statutory consultation obligations, so obviously you get very low coherence. Then we step up slightly to C2, which is consultation. This is your classic compliance level. Workers are told about changes, they can ask a few questions, maybe make some representations. But let's be real, it's often just a total box-ticking exercise. If the business case for the change isn't rock solid and perfectly explained, which, let's face it, it rarely is, your coherence is still going to sit stubbornly low. Okay, let's keep moving up the mountain. C3 brings us to cooperation. At this level, yes, we're meeting all our compliance obligations, but we're adding a layer of positive business culture, transparency, and trust. Because the workers actually trust management here, they accept that the changes are valid, which gives us a solid, moderate level of coherence. But C4, collaboration, that is the absolute summit. This is the gold standard. Management and workers don't just chat, they actively co-design the change program. They co-own the whole shebang, from the very first brainstorming session right through to the final review. And because the workers literally helped build the architecture of the change, the coherence is off the charts. Now, looking at this summary, the journey becomes super clear. Your level of coherence scales directly with how deeply you actually involve your workers. It's a straight line from basic management direction down at the bottom, all the way up to full-on co-designing at the top. The takeaway here? If you want high coherence and smooth, painless transitions, you absolutely have to evolve past just taking questions. You have to start actively building trust and co-designing solutions with your people. Of course, it's one thing to look at a neat theoretical hierarchy, but it's totally different to see it in action. So let's pivot for a second. Let's map this theoretical model against some actual real-world statutory standards. And we're going to use the jurisdiction of Victoria as our prime example here to see how this plays out in the real world. We can see a really stark contrast between two different government standards here. On one hand, you have the WorkSafe Victoria Compliance Code for Psychological Health. This is the baseline, right? The bare minimum regulatory requirement for reducing psychosocial hazards. It's definitely a good start, but it really only hits around that C2 or C3 level on our model. But then, on the other hand, you have the Victorian Mentally Healthy Workplaces Framework. This was built as a best practice guide after the Royal Commission into Victoria's mental health system. It heavily pushes for a collaborative, co-design approach, which, as you guessed it, aligns perfectly with our ultimate C4 summit. So here is the absolute crucial so what of all this. Adopting a framework that pushes your organization up to that C4 collaboration level, it does way more than just keep you out of legal hot water. It actually redesigned the entire psychology of your workplace. Instead of just playing defense and managing risks to meet a duty, you're actively building psychological safety through positive leadership. You're literally fixing the root causes of these hazards rather than just constantly putting band-aids on the symptoms of poor communication. It's a total game changer. Now, reaching that C4 summit is not exactly a walk in the park. Most organizations definitely can't do it overnight, which is why having an expert guide is so incredibly valuable. Ridgeline HR actually developed this 4C model, and this is their bread and butter. They specialize in helping companies break out of that rigid, stress-inducing compliance mindset and transition into a genuinely productive, positive culture. And they use their specific post-work coaching and workplace improvement strategies to actually make that shift happen on the ground. So how do they actually do it? Let's walk through their roadmap. The journey usually kicks off with an independent psychosocial hazard assessment, basically lifting the hood to see exactly where your strengths and vulnerabilities are. From there, they run highly tailored workshops for boards and leadership teams. But the really cool part is how they establish what they call workplace improvement teams. These are representative groups that partner directly with your employees to co-design the change. They even hook up with creative affiliates to build engaging multimedia comms, making sure the message is always totally coherent and inclusive from top to bottom. I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative challenge to wrap up this explainer. I want you to take a hard look at your own organization and honestly appraise where your current change management practices land on this 4C scale. Are you stuck down at C1, just firing off directives? Are you checking the C2 compliance boxes but sitting around wondering why everyone is still so frustrated? Or are you actively climbing up toward that C4 collaboration? Because honestly, before your next major workplace change rolls out, figuring out exactly how coherent your connection is, that might just be the most important assessment you ever make.